Welcome everyone. Greetings, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are joining us from. Welcome to another Reboot Aviation webinar. I'm your host for today's program. My name is Steve Hendrickson. I'm the Director of Advisory Services for Camber. I'll be joined today by a panel of experts in airline commercial matters, and they in turn will be sharing with you some of their thoughts on what carriers are doing to address the various commercial challenges and opportunities that are facing the industry today. As many of you know, the COVID crisis has had a profound impact on passenger demand and thus airline revenue performance. Booking curves have been compressed, price elasticities of demand have fluctuated wildly, and determining a consumer's willingness to pay has become an even greater challenge than normal. Chief commercial officers around the industry have been forced to remake their teams, to redefine their processes, and to reconstitute their metrics for success. But out of this hardship has sprung much experimentation and innovation, which we think will pave the way for future strategies and tactics that will promote commercial agility unlike the industry has ever seen before. Our panel of experts today includes Jeremy Millian from Amadeus, Emiliano Nerodi from Tarmac, Rodrigo Rioseco from Viva Air, and Chris Anthony from Camber. I'll be introducing each of them shortly. The agenda for today is first to go into Jeremy's talk on optimization of network planning and scheduling, then to hear from Emiliano and Rodrigo. And then finally, Chris will bring us to a holistic approach toward commercial thinking. And then we'll open it up after that for questions and discussion from the audience. You can use the chat feature to submit your questions, and we will then open those up to the panel at a later point. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce our first speaker. Mr. Jeremy Millian from Amadeus has an extensive background in the airline industry. He's a veteran with over 20 years of experience. He has expertise in new route forecasting, flight schedule optimization, schedule feasibility testing, pricing and inventory strategy. His airline tenure has included work in operations, scheduling, network planning, pricing, revenue management, and he's been with carriers like Swiss Air Group, Continental Airlines, United, and Delta. He also has experience from the airline IT vendor side, and he currently serves as the Director of Global Sales for the Sky Suite, which is Amadeus's suite of network planning and scheduling tools. Jeremy, I will give you the floor.
Thank you, Steve. Appreciate it. And hello, everybody. As Steve said, I'm Director of Airline Solutions for Amadeus, specifically targeting the network planning and scheduling arena. And as Steve mentioned, this has been an extremely, obviously, impactful pandemic. And it's like nothing we've ever seen. You know, we've had sort of things hit us from the health side on the airline side, but it's been more regionalistic, like, you know, SARS and even some of the swine flu. And what we find ourselves is we find ourselves having a lot of times more questions than we do answers. And so hopefully what we're going to do today is try to address some of these questions that we at Amadeus have been receiving from airlines all over the world. And you'll see there's a few examples up here on the screen right now. And what's really been facing us even more so is just that it's just not limited to the airline industry, because this is global in nature and it's affecting every industry. Obviously, it is affecting the demand, and that's, you know, it's just a domino effect across the whole spectrum, if you will. So like I said, we're going to try to address a few of these questions today, and we'll go ahead and go to the next slide here, Steve. Okay, so we're talking network planning and scheduling, and when we talk about network planning and scheduling, we think of this is what defines the airline's revenue potential. We think of it as the heartbeat of the airline, and really, in essence, it is the product that the airline has. Now, when people think of product, they'll think of, okay, you know, am I buying a first class seat? Am I an economy seat? Am I buying onboard meals, or do they have in-flight entertainment? And these are definitely part of the airline's overall product offering to the customer. However, at the end of the day, you're buying a ticket to get from point A to point B. And that is a schedule. And how the airlines design their network and offer that schedule is what is actually bringing you to them in the first place. And then your other factors such as pricing, availability, things of this nature. But when we think of the network planning and scheduling area, we sort of focus on these sort of 5 pillars that you see on the screen now. And I'll focus on the first part and the first 3 in the middle. And the first one being the network design. So how is the airline going to serve their customers? And this could be, an airline that wants to serve point to point. So they want to serve, directly to each city nonstop. Or maybe they're going to have a hub where they'll bring passengers in and connect to multiple destinations and send them out. Or maybe they'll do some level of a hybrid. And then what type of network are they going to have? Are they going to be focusing as an ultra low cost carrier? Are they going to be a full service carrier? So these all are things that get factored in when they're designing their network. And then part of that design are the 2 pieces that you see below. That's the fleet and the timing optimization. So once you have a schedule in place, your expensive assets of your aircraft have to be deployed properly. And you want to best match capacity to demand. And that's even more important in this environment that we're in. But then on top of that, you have the timing of the flights. So what time we offer the flight is going to decide the attractiveness for you, the consumer, on when you're going to want to fly. So the optimization of these pieces are all sort of part of the core tenets that make up the key pieces of the schedule. However, an airline that's building this network can't do this in a vacuum. So that's why you see on the left-hand side, the competitive effects. So we need to understand what is the impact to the competition as we make changes, and potentially vice versa. As they make changes, how is it going to impact us? And this is even more so important because of the fact that the competitive landscape has completely changed. So not every airline is at full strength again. Some airlines are not flying at all. Some airlines are flying more. So, and it's changing every day. And so as a result of this, the competitive piece is extremely important. And then that leads us to the final sort of piece, which is on the right-hand side, and we call it schedule robustness. And what this basically is saying is you can come up with the best commercially viable schedule. However, if it isn't operationally robust and can actually be flown and operated, then you're never going to see that revenue potential anyway. What I mean by this is if you have a disruption, if there's a bad thunderstorm or bad air traffic, delays, how does that impact your schedule? Is it going to cause it to fall apart and you're going to have to reaccommodate people, or are you actually able to operate in these types of environments? So these are sort of the 5 pieces that we think of at Amadeus when we start to think of network planning. And again, this is the starting point for the airline and is really what defines the overall revenue potential for the airline. Now, with the pandemic in place, we feel that there's a new approach that's needed to scheduling. And the best way to approach that, in our opinion, is obviously we think of it as technology. Technology is the great leveler of the playing field, as we like to say. Airlines have always been doing more with less. Departments are even shorter and smaller because of the fact that you have maybe fewer personnel because a lot of the airlines have had to unfortunately cut staffing. So you're having that piece of it. Then on top of that, you're having all the other questions and challenges of the normal day-to-day of the data and the competition. So with technology, we think of things of basically having like machine learning and artificial intelligence. Having these types of components built into tools to help you basically come up to decisions and be smarter and make better decisions faster. But as part of that, though, it's not just tools. So it also is processes. So a lot of the same legacy processes that have been in place need to be revisited and basically approached because what used to work 2 years ago and 3 years ago can't be applied in today's environment. So as a result, like I said, we think there should be a new approach. We'll go to the next slide, please. So let's start with the process, please. And so if you think about it, the traditional approach that airlines usually would use is they would take a look at either last month's or last season's schedule. And let's take an example of this coming summer. They would say, let's look at last summer, and we'll use that as a starting point for our schedule. Problem is, last summer's schedule is not relevant anymore because some airlines weren't flying at all. And if they were flying, maybe they're flying at a skeleton capacity. And then who knows what they're going to be flying this coming summer? It could be, a difference of, 50 to 100% difference in terms of capacity. So you can't use hey, we'll use last summer as a proxy, or we'll even use 2019 because it's not relevant anymore. But what they would do is they would take that schedule and then start and say, okay, I'm going to use that as a starting point, as a shell, if you will, and then I'm going to make micro changes. Well, you also had a lot of time to basically go through this whole process and evaluate, well, what if I want to iterate with my other departments that are within the airline and get their feedback? And you had time to basically get this and then publish the schedule. However, that time is not necessarily relevant anymore in terms of being able to have it as a luxury. So you would take it, you publish a schedule, and it goes through the process of going through the revenue management piece where your RM colleagues are managing the inventory, and then of course the schedule's flown. That time cycle, unfortunately, has been compressed dramatically these days. So we feel there should be a modern approach. And by that, we think that you should have clean sheet scheduling. So being able to build a schedule from scratch, being able to build schedules faster so you can have different scenarios to basically evaluate and put in place. Having the ability to create operational friendly schedules, bringing the operational estimates and environments much sooner into the planning process as opposed to waiting for operational feedback. This would reduce obviously the number of iterations required, and obviously gives you more flexibility and time to basically get the schedule out. And then we'll talk about some additional components of once the schedule's open and actually out there for sale with respect to adapt optimization and what we call close-in refleeting, as you get more in tune, if you will, with the operating groups and approach closer to the day of departure. So again, we feel that a modern approach needs to be built, and one of those key tenets is what we said is clean sheet scheduling. And it sounds like it might be something like from science fiction, but it's actually something that exists today and that we actually have tools that can do. And just to kind of reiterate what it is it's literally taking a clean sheet. So you're not taking a previous season schedule. You're taking what are the key pieces of what you want for your network. Like, I want to fly 5 times a day here. I want to fly 3 times a week to this destination. How many aircraft I have. My operational rules, and then your commercial elements, your fares and things of this nature, as well as some of the demand numbers. And then the tool is actually building the schedule. So instead of you manually trying to build and piece and time a schedule and do it, the tool is doing that. And it's solving the timing, the routing, and the fleeting simultaneously. So it's taking all of these elements, if you will, think of it as ingredients of a cake, mixing it up, putting it into an oven, and then out comes a cake. So instead of basically, you trying to manually do this, what if you had something where you could hit a button and it could do it for you? And SkyMax, which is our optimization tool, is built specifically for this. It wasn't designed for a pandemic, but it lends itself quite nicely given the fact that a lot of airlines are having to actually build their schedules completely from scratch because they're going from not flying anymore to all of a sudden deploying 20, 30, 40 aircraft, whatever the case may be. And this allows them to come up with multiple flexible analyses to basically evaluate what's going to be the best for them given the current competitive environment and situation. Now, once we have that schedule in place, we'll go ahead and go to the next slide. The next piece that we have to deal with is Steve, if you could advance. Thank you. So now that we've got this schedule in place and we've built this sort of clean sheet, now the question is, well, what happens when the environment's changing? So, hey, what happens if borders are closing or borders are opening? And we can capitalize on this. Well, we've got a schedule in place. We don't want to go back and rebuild again, although we could, because we don't really have the time and luxury to do that. But we also don't want to unravel all this great schedule that we just built that we think is commercially viable. So how do we do something that basically matches the both of those? Basically takes in these changes to the environment, but actually keeps most of our schedule, if you will, as consistent as possible. Now, you can do this manually, and even with some of the tools that are out there in the marketplace today, it can help, but it's still very time-consuming and very painful. And again, as we know, things change rapidly. So countries could say, hey, we are closing in 2 weeks. You have 2 weeks to get your schedule in order. Or, hey, FYI, starting the 1st of March, we're going to be open for business. And so you only have a finite amount of time to get that schedule redone and open for sale so that you can actually try to capitalize on this new opportunity for demand. We call this adapt optimization. So having a tool to basically say, hey, I'm going to provide you these changes and let the tool basically come up with an optimization while trying to be consistent. This is what's going to help basically an airline basically position themselves better as these changes come forward, because the person that can ask and react fastest is going to be the one that can react and get the demand better and faster. Now, the last piece of sort of the puzzle here is if we get closer in, now we're getting closer to the day of departure. Now we're starting to liaise more with revenue management. And we've always had that interaction with the RM department. Having worked on both sides of that fence, I've had scheduling come to request things from me and RM have to request things from scheduling. But how do we basically help meld those two and to automate that and use tools to help us, come through these processes? And the first one we have is what we call close-in refleeting. And close-in refleeting, as the name implies, is basically redeploying your capacity to match it to the demand. So if you look at the bottom of the screen, I have two sort of examples. I have a yellow and a red one, basically that shows, hey, as I change in the demand from RM, I have the ability to basically capitalize, redeploy my aircraft, and then now put a cheaper aircraft on a route that doesn't have the demand and put a higher yielding aircraft on potentially a bigger route where I can actually capture this. So again, these are all the various steps that we're walking through, from basically clean sheet to adapt optimization to a close-in refleeting piece where you're actually really liaising more with revenue management data closer in, and basically allowing airlines to basically maximize the revenue potential given the current circumstances that are out there. And with that, I'll sort of close the door on sort of the network planning side, and I'll pass the floor back over to Steve so that our next presenter can present.
Steve, I think you're on mute while you're speaking.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Jeremy, for that interesting talk, and I'm sure there will be plenty of questions for you later. Next up are a pair of speakers. We have Emiliano Nerodi from Tarmac. He's a consulting associate there. And we also have Rodrigo Rioseco from Viva Air. To introduce Emiliano, he's an economist with a master's degree in finance. He has over 7 years of experience in airline revenue management. He has held senior management positions in regional market RM for Aerolíneas Argentinas. Yeah. And of course, we have Rodrigo, who is currently in charge of revenue management, pricing, and ancillaries at Viva Air. We have a real airline practitioner in our midst, which is great. He's an economist with over 10 years of experience in the airline RM world. He's previously held positions at Sky Airlines, where he was the head of RM and pricing. And he's also been in charge of the international markets at LATAM Airlines. So, gentlemen, we welcome you to the floor, and let's hear all about it.
Okay, thank you very much, Steve. So the idea of this segment is to share with you the experience we had implementing alternative processes and alternative data once the operations were resumed in the Colombian market last year. First of all, I would like to introduce Tarmac. Tarmac is a consultancy services provider focused mainly on revenue management and prices and pricing. And in this slide, what we are showing is the 4 pillars in which we believe the best revenue management practices should be based. So we are seeing there we have people, processes, information, and technology. Technology is about the revenue management system, but of course, to succeed, you have to have a good revenue management system, but you have to have also a good revenue management team. You have to have clear processes and a clear agenda for the revenue management team. And it is important to have good information to feed the revenue management system and for the revenue management team to take the right decisions.
Okay, hey everybody. I'm gonna talk about a little bit of what's Viva Air, so everybody can get a sense on the size of these airlines, because it's a pretty standard airline. We started it 8 years ago, as an ultra low-cost carrier here in the region. We were the first one in South America to actually be launched as a low-cost carrier. This airline was created by Airlines Aviation. Obviously, they have quite a long history. Their before investment was Viva Aerobus there in Mexico, and they decided to come into Colombia and create this first low cost into the region. Here we have 2 major competitors right now, which both are legacy or full service carrier. One is Avianca with over 100 years experience, and well, LATAM, which is the other monster here in the region. So it was not an easy decision. It was an obvious one, but not an easy one. And today we were, a couple of years ago or before the pandemic, we just bought 50 new aircraft. From those, 35 are the 320s NEOs and 15 are the 320 CEOs. So Obviously, it's a huge impact. Today we have over 20 planes. There are 50 more coming. This year we're receiving 6 of those. So you can imagine how we are fighting and challenging every team and every decision that we take, because we're over doubling our size in the pandemic. So it's a huge challenge right now, but it's a 50 aircraft, 60 aircraft airline here in the region. So it's a big one. It's a most standard low cost for everybody in the world. So what have we done? Right now we're transporting over 6 million passengers, and we have over 40,000 flights. That was obviously before pandemic. So that's to give you a sense on what Viva Air right now and what it means into the region. If you can pass to the next one, please. So just a few more details. When we started just in Colombia. Today we're flying Colombia and Peru, both countries, both domestically and international routes. We started with 4 planes, all classic 320s right now. Today we have 24 plus the 6 coming this year. So we're gonna end up the year with 30 aircraft. The first year of operation, we moved or we transport 500,000 passengers. We have transport over 26 million passengers in these 8 years of the company. So it has been a huge and exponential growth in the market right now. We started with only 8 routes, obviously none of them with daily frequency. Right now we have 38 routes in the region, and obviously we have more density in our schedule. If you can pass one, please. And to give you a sense, this is our network, it's pretty much the same. So we have over 11 routes in Peru, 4 international routes right now, and more than 21 or 22 routes in the domestic Colombia. As I said, with the new 50 aircraft, 35 of them are neos. So our growth or our expectation is to grow internationally and start making a less domestic airline and start being a more international. And that's quite a challenge with all the legacies that are here. There's not only Avianca and LATAM, also Copa is one of the main carriers that will do the same kind of international routes. So that's a summary of what is Viva right now in the region in South America.
Emiliano, you're on mute.
Sorry, thank you. Thank you, Rodrigo. What we are showing here is a flow that may represent most of the airline situations once COVID took place last year. So the first thing we know is that after pandemic and restrictions, the demand dropped down and the revenue reduced to almost zero for most airlines. And so some airlines decided to cut salaries or to reduce the headcount. In some cases here in the region, what we saw was that the employees under this uncertain situation decided to move from the airline industries to some other industries. So many revenue management teams were reduced. And what happens, what could happen to the airlines is that once the operations are resumed, maybe the demand recovers, maybe, but if you don't have, as we were talking before, one of the pillars, which is the people, if you don't have the correct team to face that situation, maybe the revenues are not going to recover as fast as the demand. So this is just an introduction for you to explain why Viva decided to go into a BPO revenue management with Tarmac. And let's, please, Rodrigo, tell something about the context where Viva was in September when we began working together.
Okay, so going back, I don't know, to give you a sense, Colombia shut down the industry in March, the middle of March. We restarted operation in September, so it was a huge and a very extensive 6 months of a shutdown. There was no operational approved by the government. And when we started it, obviously we were told, I don't know, 25 of August, we can start operating September 1st. So every company just went crazy and just started making promotional and put the schedule. Everybody thought it was a very little schedule for everybody, but it was the restart and we were quite happy about it. What happened through the pandemic? We lost 80% of our revenue management team. We used to be 6 analysts. We had only 1 at the time when the operation restarted. The guy who stayed, or our analyst, he had 3 months in the company, was his first job. We didn't work, obviously, or he didn't manage flights for 6 months. And then he has to handle the whole network restart operation with every data that we have, every statistic that we can had to try to see how the market was gonna go. Obviously it was wrong. We didn't know what to expect. So we were very afraid. I was very afraid of what's gonna be happening to the market. We didn't have a standardized process in every health check of we use RM in every health check, or I think that's a very common thing in every team. People or analysts trying to get their own way of making things, and it's very hard to make a standard of how things should be done in the system, because there's always some analysts that will go in a different way. So that was a huge impact or a huge thing that we were challenged to do. Here in Colombia, it has been crazy, the dynamic of market. September didn't anticipate at all. People were buying for the very next day. Suddenly in October, people start anticipating and start buying. Our high season goes from 15th of December to the 15th of January. And they got, and they started filling every plane. Actually, tour operators start making reservation, and we suddenly had 20, 30, 40, and in a couple of days, we were booked for the high season of 50%, 40%, something like that. So we got scared. I'm talking about only 4 weeks after operation. So there was a huge coordination with network planning or scheduling. We start operating, we start getting more planes and making the pilots come back again to the company. So it was dramatically dynamic markets. Actually, right now anticipation in the markets is pretty much as September. People are buying for the very next day. So every curve or every design you had in every business rule or everything you knew about the market is wrong. And it's gonna make you make wrong decisions because of what you know. You're not learning, you're trying to get whatever you learned from before. So you're most probably to make it wrong for your decisions. The pressure was very high when it resolved ASAP. Obviously, the cash flow was very weak at the time, and the game changed a little bit. It's not we used to manage or to optimize the flown revenue. Now we're managing the cash revenue, so it's very differently in a sense. You don't know when the governments, especially here in South America, they're gonna make you go into curfew again or whatever. So it's a little bit differently, and you have to make different decisions from an RM perspective than in a finance perspective. And with all this said, the 3 companies that are here were 4 airlines. The 3 others, they went into Chapter 11. So we knew they might be doing some stupid things in the market or filing some different fares for getting the cash as soon as possible as they needed. And with all this said, the network was unstable. So what was our main challenge at the point? I'm saying what was happening, and when we decide, we said we cannot manage this. It's gonna take so much time to train the analysts. It's gonna take so much time to actually hire new analysts for the team. So what we did is that we found tarmac. It was a good solution. We knew that here in the region, it's not common from airlines from our size to actually third-party RM. We knew Emiliano and Juan, which they had experience. And what we did is that we actually passed them pretty much 90% or even 95% of our processes to them. This was an actually great thing because not only they knew RM, they knew what to do as what we needed to do. They catch up very quickly into the market. But the most challenging part here is pretty much what you guys are living in the home office system, that you need to be very coordinated. So it doesn't happen that network planning changed the network and we didn't tell the guys from Argentina or the guys from Tarmac, and they suddenly see everything in the system. So that was what's happening. I'm gonna let Emiliano tell you about the results, but those were the challenges that we were heading for, and why we decided to go into this very abnormal but very good results strategy since September.
Thank you, Rodrigo. So basically, we at the beginning of the segment, we said we were going to talk about alternative processes and alternative data. So the BPO is the alternative process we wanted to talk about, and now I'm going to explain how we implemented the revenue management strategies once we began working with Viva. So one of the main challenges we had was that the anticipation had changed a lot, as Rodrigo was saying before. So we had to change all the parameters in the system to avoid putting in risk the revenue. So what we saw was that in 2019, 50% of the bookings were done during the last 30 days before departure. And in 2020, the 75% of the bookings were done during that period. So that's what we did. We didn't take into account the historical data because it was useless, and we decided to take just the post-COVID information. We had a very little information, just 14 or 15 days of operations, but we thought it was better to consider that information and to make and to construct the parameters with that information and not with the historical data. Next, please. So even the post-COVID information was not enough, and we didn't have the chance to work at the group of markets level. So we aggregated information and we put that into the system. With that aggregated information, we defined the booking curves, and then once we put this into the system, what we saw was that a very little time later, like, I don't know, less than a month, we saw that the booking curve had changed again, and the anticipation had changed. So we had to again change all the parameters in the system, and month after month we are seeing that the anticipation is changing, and it is changing still today. So we are doing this every month after month. We are reviewing the booking curves, we are reviewing the class mix, and we are reviewing all the parameters in the system to adjust them to the present situation. So the last topic I want to talk about is about promotions. We discussed a lot about this with Rodrigo. We were not sure if under this scenario the promotions were going to stimulate or dilute. So what I think is that it depends. It depends on the market. So basically, what I think is that maybe for a market with a little demand, with a low demand, like, I don't know, maybe a corporate market, promotions are not going to stimulate. Maybe for some other markets like leisure or some beaches in the case of Colombia, where demand has recovered pretty fast, maybe the promotions will be stimulating. And what I mean is, as soon as the demand recovers, promotions seem to have the same impact they used to have before COVID. So that's what we are seeing in the market. And well, that's all. I don't know, Rodrigo, if you want to tell anything else about this topic.
Yeah, as we were saying, it was a very hard time, or it was very difficult. And actually, this is actually, you need to control the politics in the company, because everybody in our end would mainly agree that making promos right now, it's pretty much everything is solution, or it won't stimulate what you're doing in the same way that it used to be. So you need to be very careful. But the challenge here is that you cannot say your CCO or your CEO, we're gonna stay with the fares and just see what happens, because that's not an option. So it was kind of hard at the beginning. The market took it very well. Obviously, we actually got elasticities around 1, so we changed fares for passengers due to the ancillaries. It was actually a good decision. It's getting us results. It's not forever, and right now here is the second wave, so it has dropped a little bit the elasticity. So we're not quite sure that it's functioning very well. But I think that the main part here is that we saw dramatically changes into the market, and so with this environment so hard, we needed to take a dramatic decision. I mean, hard times need you to make different decisions. And I really think outsourcing the RM into guys that would know what they're doing and just would give you results right now. Because right now, Viva, especially and low cost, I think around the world, we're not trying, and this is going to be kind of hard, but we're not trying to build our teams and to make the best out of our management. We're in wartime, and we needed the best soldiers we can get at that time. And those were people that actually has been growing in the market or in the industry. They knew what they needed to do. They knew the system. They knew exactly what we were doing. So we spend more time making strategical decisions than making tactical decisions into our end. And that was an actual very good thing here in Viva. We're quite happy with that decision. And it led us, me and the other guys from the commercial team, actually rest in tarmac and just make different decisions, especially network plannings, because that has been the greatest change ever. We passed from 15 points of market share before pandemic to 25. So we took 10 points. That means very agile, being very agile, being very quick in your decisions. And I'm pretty sure with the team that we had before, or building our team and with the new guys, we wouldn't be able to take as much as risk as we took in this last 5 months of making this third-party alliance with Tarmac. So I think I'm quite happy with the decisions, and actually it has been working because our new guys are being trained by Tarmac. So it's a one-on-one training on revenue management in short groups, in small teams, where time is it's a thing that nobody has right now. We're making airlines are making more with less. I don't know how that happened. I thought that couldn't be possible, but it is. And right now, I think we're quite happy with what is going on. Actually, it has been a question here in Viva if we need to outsource some more teams for a little while until this actually passes, because finding new people that wants to get into the industry right now is not an easy thing. So that's it for us.
Well, thank you, Rodrigo. Thank you, Emiliano, for sharing that experience. Very interesting to hear stories from down in the trenches during this, as you said, wartime. Our next speaker to keep things moving is Chris Anthony. He's a co-founder of Camber, and he's the managing director overseeing the advisory group at Camber. He brings more than 15 years of airline experience to his role there. He has worked directly or consulted on behalf of dozens of carriers from around the world, has worked on just about every continent, and his background includes time as a practitioner of pricing and revenue management, ancillaries optimization, promotion planning, distribution channel management, network development, offer strategy, and loyalty program design. He is not just a practitioner, he's also a seasoned consultant and a savvy technologist. He's worked on both the development of software systems as well as the organizational process optimization to apply those tools. So he comes with a very rich background, and he's no stranger to value creation using those tools and processes. So Chris, I'll hand you the floor.
Thank you very much, Steve. I will leave it up to everyone's interpretation whether that wonderful introduction had something to do with the fact that you work on my team, but that everyone can think about that or not. So thanks everyone for your time. I'm very excited to be talking to you today about a topic which we in Canberra call holistic commercial thinking. And this is something that probably some of you have even heard of from before. I know there have been rumblings around the industry over the past few years of bringing things closer together, whether that be revenue management, marketing, etc. But it seems like we kind of get fits and starts and we don't make a lot of progress. And perhaps one of the reasons for that has been situations like the risks seem to outweigh the rewards. Legacy systems and processes that are in the way, those are complex to change. And it makes it difficult then to confront what might be a major opportunity because of all of those things that need to be adjusted that take a lot of time, effort, people, resources, cost. But then we look at the situation that we're currently in. And if everyone would just indulge me a minute and take a journey down memory lane to say more than a year ago, let's think about what we considered in that environment to be volatility or variability in data from a revenue management perspective. We were concerned by things like seasonality trends, what happens on a day of week basis, time of day basis, special events. We were all concerned if we missed, I didn't realize that there was a Lady Gaga concert in Barcelona, for example. Skirmishes on the competitor side that sometimes would boil over into fare wars. Well, I think all of us would love to go back to that environment. We have a nostalgia for that past, that comfortable world of what we knew and were familiar with in terms of volatility. Today's world, though, is radically different. Look what's shifted. Sudden government mandates, for example, things change at the drop of a hat. Travel restrictions today might not be the same as they are tomorrow. We look at what consumer has happened in terms of demand. Willingness to pay doesn't matter when willingness to fly is an issue. The competitive landscape in terms of what's being schedule filed, Jeremy mentioned before how we used to have this comfortable cycle of file the schedule outwards. Well, now that's been all completely upended in terms of people being, you'll see a schedule out there and then it's completely different the next day, or it gets changed last minute. So if I pause there for a moment and say, let's step away from the commercial and look at what already exists in the airline industry from an operational perspective, we could make the argument that airlines and we people who work in airlines actually have done a very good job in taking a holistic approach to the operational side of the business. The OCC really does function as like a central nervous system. You have all of the read information that comes in, whether that's weather, what's happening with crew, what's happening with maintenance, and that's all done in a streaming real-time basis so that then people can make quick decisions about the best way to react to challenges in the marketplace. Do I need to do an equipment swap? Do I need to do a gate swap? But then you think about what could happen in the environment where would you ever want to always do a gate swap to solve for any situation? Of course not. Similarly, a promotion is not the solution for every single situation where you have a demand problem. In order to take a better approach for what we need to do in terms to solve the commercial lens, we probably need to look at it in a similar way to what is the full picture in the way that you do from the operational standpoint. At the same time, operations has been in this very fast-paced cycle of I have to read the information, make changes, react to it very, very quickly, where for better or worse, I think in commercial, we've long kind of accepted this attitude that we had more time. Maybe we didn't in reality, but the perception was is that our decision-making cycle was longer. But now, if we look at how the pandemic has changed things, I think we can all come to terms with the reality that that cycle has dramatically shrunk. Booking curves, there was just Emiliano and Rodrigo were just talking about how much that's shifted to being closer in. I've spoken to a number of airlines. One director of revenue management told me just 2 days ago that it's not even a curve anymore. It's a hockey stick. So in that environment, everything that we used to know, the time that we had to react is so much different. It's radically shifted. We already talked about how competitors will file optimistic schedules. That's something Jeremy referenced. And then they go all of a sudden last minute, they cancel everything, or in the last 2 weeks. It's not the same that we used to. We have to be able to react more quickly. And then there's all of the unpredictables. We don't know if there's going to be a new quarantine in, Brazil tomorrow, or if there's going to be a change on policies. Can people eat at restaurants in California again? All of that impacts what the decisions that a consumer makes from a travel perspective, which then impacts our demand. Whoa, we jumped a little bit ahead there. Yeah. And so it requires us to be able to take more of those actions based on real-time signals in the marketplace. However, how can we do that across all of commercial if we still operate in a very siloed environment? Yes, some of those barriers have been breaking down in terms of, say, scheduling, working a bit closer with revenue management. But I think it's quite common today in the industry that we still see a lot of divisions between things like pricing, revenue management, ancillaries. Where does ancillaries fit? Some airlines it's with marketing, some airlines it's with e-commerce, some it works with pricing and revenue management. Sometimes it's its own standalone team. It is very hard to coordinate, communicate, and reach the best outcomes possible if all of these various functions are using different KPIs, so their measurements are for success, their actions available to them are separated and not coordinated. How can we get to an optimal result? Likely, if we were then to consider all of the various pieces of information and data available to us through the single lens of maximization of demand capture and revenue opportunity, then we would be able to have a toolkit of outcomes that leads to those results. What would be some of the other benefits that come out of this process? Would think about avoiding duplicate decision-making or being able to optimize the combinations. I can think of many situations where an airline at the same time has been doing a fare sale while doing a loyalty offer, while adjusting its schedule capacity on the markets that those sales and offers are also available on. Is that an ideal outcome? Likely not. It could be, but we need to make sure that we have the right information and are making an assessment based on all of that information to create that optimal outcome. It also means the lack of silos or the breaking down of silos would put us in a position to be able to do more experimentation, learn more from each other, which hopefully would produce an environment that we are prototyping and trialing out new ideas more quickly, which is essential in an environment, like we said before, comes to a much shorter cycle of read and react. So how might we pull all these pieces together? What's a view to this? Something like a war room mentality or a command center from the commercial perspective, if we look back to how the operational one was structured, could look something like this. In terms of the sensors or the data that is being streamed into the process from a real-time basis, instead of looking at the weather or looking at where the crew is for a flight, we would be looking at indicators that touch on supply, demand, and probably regulations. I'm most interested, I think I'm very excited about the innovations that have happened in particular in the demand space. Traditionally, revenue management, other areas of commercial, what do we make our decisions based on? We look at bookings, whether that is historical bookings or bookings on a forward flight. We now have the opportunity to go further up into the funnel and be able to make some of these decisions off of things like purchase intent. Are people clicking through from a meta perspective? Are they lingering in your booking flow? Are they putting different combinations and searching different markets together, which shows that they're flexible, but they are definitely interested in going? We can take that up even higher into the funnel from the perspective of things like sentiment indicators. What are people talking about on the internet? Is there a sense that going to the Caribbean right now is more safe than going to Europe? All of those things can be packaged together and taken from as real-time indicators and fed into a single repository, database structure, et cetera, which then is overlaid with kind of what we want to call your tactical playbook. This is no different than what someone would do in, say, a sports environment, whether it's like F1 racing or football or anything like that. I have a number of things that are indicating to me what's happening, who's on the pitch, what are the conditions out there, what stage are we in the match? And then I have various tactics that I can apply based on what that information or those signals are to me. We can learn a lot from that and apply that same type of approach through the commercial lens of an airline. What I also think is very important here is you don't lose the human touch. I think it is very critical that all of this can be brought together and shown as a view of recommendations or suggestions or probabilities, but we still have room for the human judgment, for the individual to take their knowledge or their creativity and utilize all of that information to then arrive at what is the best decision to achieve the maximum output. And that could be any one of the numbers of actions that we're all familiar with, whether those be sales promotions, loyalty offers, cancellations, etc., or some combination of the above. So I'd like to give you a view of what this could actually look like. So here is just a simple mock-up, I would say, of call it a cockpit, a commercial CCO cockpit, where take on the bottom left, we do have a funnel. As I said before, normally in the past, we would only be looking at the bottom of that funnel. But as we move up it, we can get indicators that suggest, wow, people's willingness to fly, not just pay, has increased week over week or gone down, or my direct sales are increasing or interest is increasing, even though those coming from third parties are decreasing. At the top, I could have things that indicate what is happening overall network-wise for my intent or my opportunities, and then be able to break those down into what type of opportunity it is. If you have a situation where you're dealing with, say, low awareness in a market, a pricing change might not be the optimal solution. Maybe it's to push digital advertising, for example. Any of those things can then be encapsulated through a view that suggests, where does the opportunities lie? Which ones should I pursue? What are going to have the most impact? What are going to lead to the best results? And this is something that could be then potentially overlaid through existing systems. It's not something you have to rip and replace everything, but combine it with all of the infrastructure that we already have in place on the commercial side at a lot of airlines and deep link it, connect it through to everyday activities. So I hope that kind of gives a possibility of what that future could look like. But I think there is a lot more benefit than just, say, recovery from the pandemic. As traumatic as COVID has been, I think it really is a catalyst for deeper, longer term change within our industry. A lot of these things were bubbling up or rumbling underneath the surface, and then COVID just exposed them to us, that we have these challenges that we have been not necessarily facing up to and dealing with. And now we have the opportunity, thanks to necessity, we have to do it. But even once we've done that, in order to facilitate our return to revenue and profitable health, I would ask the question, who wants to give up on the benefits that would also come? Would anyone want to give back the synergies or the compressed timelines that are involved in decision making? Would any airline not want to be a league ahead of its competitors? Rodrigo mentioned doing more with less. How is doing more with less ever going to go away as a benefit, even if we return to some state of normalcy? I don't think it will. So we have an opportunity today to use something like a holistic commercial approach embodied through something like a commercial CCO cockpit to help us down the road to recovery. But even once we return to that state of normalcy, I think many CCOs are going to relish this new toolkit, this new data and all this value that it can provide that's at their fingertips, in the same way that investment bankers and football managers and political campaigns are already doing around the world. So I'll stop there. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Chris. Thank you very much to all of our panelists. We would like to now open things up for some question and answers. Again, I would encourage you to use the Q&A or chat function to submit your questions, and we already have a few coming in here. So the first one that I have is directed to Jeremy. And Jeremy, the question is basically, what would you say is the best way to source a demand forecast to fuel the scheduling decisions in the process that you described? Especially given the dynamic environment we're in.
Yeah, that's a great question. It's the $1 million question, as we like to say. Unfortunately, there's no magic wand that we can wave and know exactly where these numbers are going to come from. Otherwise, I'd be a rich man, and could you apply that someplace else? And I think Chris touched on it as well. You're having to look for additional data sources. You can't look at the historical piece. I mean, the simplest way that we talk to airlines is they look at the historical and they roughly guess. They go, you know what, we're going to be at 30% of what we were, or 50%, and then they say, hey, we'll do trial and error. And that's kind of that analysis piece. At least you can run scenarios with it. The other things we're seeing is, as Chris kind of hit on, is you're starting to move up that food chain. Shopping data. Hey, what are people actually out there looking at? Hey, I'm looking at the Caribbean. Maybe the Caribbean is, nobody's booking, but they're looking at it. So there is some demand there. And then the other thing that we're seeing is the combination of trying to use that RM data that we're seeing in terms of the trends to say, hey, you know what? These type of flights were booking at a different level a year ago or when we were in a normalcy. And then what we'll do is we'll apply that level of a ratio variance between what we see now in our bookings versus what we used to see in terms of the curves, and maybe apply that ratio to it to apply. Unfortunately, there's not one simple answer to say this is where it is. You have to get creative, and you have to start to look at what data sources you have and then try to apply them the best way. So it's a combination of multiple ways that we've seen airlines kind of attack this problem.
Indeed, and we've heard a lot of that in the pandemic. Lots of creative alternative data sources coming into play, new forecasting models being attempted and tried, and I think it's still an emerging body of work throughout the industry. Thanks for that answer. I'd like to put our next question that's come in here to Chris. And Chris, the question is, can you speak to any recent real world examples of where some of these pillars between the departments and the functions in the commercial area have in fact been broken down to some degree, and where stronger, more integrated work has happened as a result?
Yeah, so I mean, I can speak more anecdotally to some things that have happened in the industry. Like I'm aware of some progress that's been made in terms of not having as much dilution across offers when bringing loyalty and revenue management together at American Airlines, for example. But I also think where this really needs to start going forward, and where kind of the camber thinking would be in this lens, is you can't really get people on the same page and break down their silos if they're measuring things, if they're measuring their success in different ways. So if I think back to the airlines I've worked at, quite often there are things like, the web team is measuring impressions, or the marketing team is looking at how many people open the email, and somebody else is looking at conversion rates, and revenue management is looking at RASK, or maybe they're looking at load factor. There's all of these different metrics. I think we have to start in anchoring back to demand capture and revenue opportunity. And that's what we're speaking to when we call it a camber opportunity index, which takes in all of these valuable pieces of information and looks to calculate what is, across all of the spectrum, the optimal output. And that way, if you can anchor all of the different users and departments to the one source of truth is this, and we are going to be measured and held accountable, responsible to our effectiveness in delivering on this one source of truth, that's the way to really bring those barriers and walls down, and then we can move forward to more process changes and actual system changes.
All right, well, thank you, Chris. We have another. Sorry, was somebody piping in there? Okay, we have a question for Emiliano or Rodrigo. The question relates to, as you optimize those business processes for the pandemic and you outsource some of the RM functions and use the Tarmac group, how would you describe the impact on the employees who were still with the team? How they adapted to that new process and those new external team members?
Okay. what happened? We were in a very particular issue. It's not that we were having a great team. There was only one analyst and the manager beneath me in revenue. So what actually happens, and one of the things I want to like engage with what Chris is saying, one of the functions that revenue management has in Viva Air is trying to be the OCC for commercial. We're the guys that actually trying to translate the business into the sales teams and the distribution teams and the market teams and the e-commerce team, which obviously here it's everything in silos, and it depends pretty much on us to make the translation of what it means. So what happened is that we weren't doing a great job actually at the time. We weren't training people as they were, and what they saw, it was an opportunity of actually becoming more analysts or more trained or more expert into revenue management team. I would say here, Viva, we're not the strongest RM team. We're mostly called for the commercial issues, not that on our RM perspective. So I really think that for the first time in the last 3-4 years, Viva is now focusing absolutely in the revenue management opportunities, and we weren't doing that before. So he actually took it as a huge opportunity to learn from these two guys that were dedicated to actually teach him and to take the opportunities out of the market.
Thank you, Rodrigo. We have another question from the audience. This one's directed to Jeremy. Jeremy, the question goes like this. How would you characterize the potential use of scheduling data from other past crises, such as SARS or 9/11 or something of that type, rather than attempting a full clean sheet scheduling exercise?
Yeah, good. Making sure it wasn't on mute. Sorry. That's a great question, and I think you can use the data as an example of sort of what happened in the marketplace. However, two things. One, both of those were very kind of, well, 9/11 obviously was global, but it was global where everything shut down. But then the difference was everybody sort of shut down, and then everybody sort of came back. It was not less the sort of staged approach that we're seeing sort of with respect to this pandemic, and also because each country has their own kind of regulations, it's just really affecting things. So you're seeing certain parts of the world emerge faster than others. That's where I think the clean sheet piece comes into play, which actually would be used with the sort of historical piece that you learn from SARS and 9/11. And it just allows you the ability to say, hey, how do I basically reset my network? Because again, if you had 100 aircraft and you're flying and you're now flying 20, bringing 100 aircraft, scheduled down to 20 and optimally, meaning where you're flying and how you're flying, is basically a very, very difficult task. So having the ability to kind of clean sheet and come through different scenarios, I think is a benefit. So it's not just one versus the other. I think you can learn from the previous pieces, but I think that having that ability to kind of clean sheet and reset your network gives you the flexibility to do something that you may not have ever had the chance to do before because you didn't have the luxury of the time or technology available.
Yeah. Well, thank you for addressing that. And looking at the clock, we have consumed our allotted time, and we are actually just a few minutes over, but I appreciate everybody joining us today, the patience you've shown and the questions you've provided. We look forward to seeing you again on a future Reboot Aviation webinar. Thank you very much, and have a good day, a good evening, a good morning.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.